Just in case you're not familiar with it, what Jesus taught in Luke chapter 21 runs parallel to what he taught in Matthew chapter 24 and Mark chapter 13. Of course, each record shows certain differences we need to be aware of. One of the more important differences missing from Luke is found in both Matthew's and Mark's accounts. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of the birth pains." What did Jesus use to typify the conditions he described? The beginning of birth pains. Note that he said beginning in direct contrast to the disciples' third question about the end or close of the age, which also correlates with the statement, "But the end is not yet," in Matthew 24:6. The beginning of the birth pains. Pregnancy lasts approximately 9 months or 40 weeks. Here's a portion of what Stephen Jones wrote regarding the spiritual meaning of 9. The number 9 speaks of God's visitation. This is a Hebraism that pictures God as an investigator visiting a person, city, or nation to expose the hearts, gather evidence, and see firsthand, as it were, the truth of a matter. It is much like a divine court case where the evidence is uncovered and presented to the judge for judgment. In Luke 19:43 and 44, Jesus says to the temple in Jerusalem, "For the days shall come upon you when your enemies will throw up a bank before you and surround you, and hem you in on every side, and will level you to the ground, and your children within you. And they will not leave you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation." Do you recognize that what Jesus said in Luke 19 correlates with what he said in Matthew 24:2, Mark 13:2, and Luke 21:6? Concerning 9, Bullinger states, "It is the last of the digits, and thus marks the end, and is significant of the conclusion of a matter. It is akin to the number 6, 6 being the sum of its factors, and is thus significant of the end of man, and the summation of all man's works. 9 is therefore the number of finality and judgment, for judgment is committed unto Jesus as the Son of Man. It marks the completeness, the end and issue of all things as to man, the judgment of man and all his works." In 40, Jones relates the following. 40 is the number of trial or probation. When viewed as a time cycle, we find that Israel spent 40 years being tested and tried in the wilderness. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness being tested of the devil. The number 40 can be viewed negatively in terms of the full 40 days/years of trial, but it can also be viewed positively in that it is the end of the time of trial or testing. In the positive sense, then, 40 speaks of Israel crossing the Jordan River after 40 years in the wilderness. In that sense also, Israel came from the wilderness and flowed into the promised land. 40 is the product of 8 and 5. 8 is the number of new beginnings, while 5 is grace. Thus, 40 can be seen as entering grace after a period of trial, as well as the beginning of something new. Obviously, these are both factors in the cases of Israel and Jesus. 9 speaks of visitation leading to judgment, while 40 indicates a time of trial or probation. So we could say that the time of visitation is the time of trial or tribulation, and this time is synonymous with the entire cycle of pregnancy. Now, whether we consider pregnancy in light of one or the other, there is an end or conclusion. This is the birth. So the question is, what is birth? This brings us to the following. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. In keeping with our perspective, we find in Revelation 12 a woman clothed with the sun who is pregnant and crying out in birth and in agony of giving birth. And what is birthed? A male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Who or what does this woman clothed with the sun represent? It speaks of the new covenant promise of God, which Paul called Jerusalem above, and our mother. The sun symbolizes the glory of this new covenant, which far transcends the glory of the old. And the male child? Based on Galatians 3:16, this is Christ. And we should always keep in mind that Christ is one body and many members, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. This corresponds with Revelation 2, verses 26 and 27, as well as Revelation 3:21. And the crown of 12 stars. 12 is the number of governmental perfection and divine authority, agreeing perfectly with the fact that Christ rules. So why is it important to understand tribulation as birth pains? Because it answers the statement why, through many tribulations, we must enter the kingdom of God. It is part of the divine process through which all of us must pass. Birth pains are synonymous with the wilderness. When Jesus likened tribulation to birth pains, he set a precedent. This brings us to the following. Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. First note that Paul speaks of the times and the seasons. I believe this is a reference to the cycle of sowing and reaping, which is synonymous with pregnancy. He then speaks of the day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. Why? Because when people say there is peace and security, then sudden destruction comes on them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. In other words, while most proclaim the idea of no tribulation, the reality is much tribulation. In keeping with this, consider the following. Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. For what good is the day of the Lord to you? It will be darkness and not light. It will be as though a man fled from a lion and a bear met him, or as though he went into the house, leaned his hand on the wall, and a serpent bit him. Is not the day of the Lord darkness and not light? Is it not very dark, with no brightness in it? There is much to consider regarding the day of the Lord, but in closing, let me point out that Amos describes three creatures in these passages: a lion, a bear, and a serpent. Is it just a coincidence that these correlate with the beast that rises out of the sea in Revelation 13:2?